Servers of Reddit, what's the most awkward date you've seen unfold? I once was a server at a very upscale French restaurant in NYC. One evening a middle-aged man and a young woman are sat in my section, clearly on a date. You could tell this woman was his mistress by the way they interacted with each other. They were high maintenance but pleasant enough. Right after they had received their entrees, the man looks across the way to another table and loses all the color in his face. His date noticed and turned to see what he was looking at. The man's wife was at another table, also on a date with her side piece, on the other side of the restaurant. The wife sees him and has the same expression on her face, which very quickly turns to rage. She briskly walks over to his table and starts whisper yelling at him, pointing her finger right in his face. He starts to do the same back at her. This isn't a very big restaurant, everyone knows what's going on and the atmosphere gets icy. The man's date is just staring at her plate, absolutely mortified. The wife's date pretends nothing is happening, and continues eating. Eventually, the wife storms back over to her table and wolfs down her dinner, no exaggeration, she was like rage eating. He sits down and his mistress won't speak to him for the rest of the meal. This is a fine dining restaurant, and they ordered multiple courses. Having to clear, crumb, and reset their table 2 more times was less than fun. He left a very big tip and apologized on the way out. We had a middle-aged lady come in with a gentleman. They asked for 3 menus. I went over to the table to introduce myself and ask if they were waiting for one more. The woman said no, her husband is here, and then the 2 physically at the table ordered drinks and a water. When I came back to drop off the drinks, her date was in the bathroom. The lady explained to me that her husband had died a few years ago and this guy, a friend, kept asking to go out. So she said yes but insisted her dead husband come with them. This is why they had 3 menus. She instructed me to bring her husband up as often as possible, pretend that I knew him and make sure I ask if he's having anything for dinner when I took their dinner order. She would refer to him just as if he was sitting right there. I then heard her tell this guy all night that he tries too hard and he's kind of mean. I do not miss working. In the restaurant industry. It was clearly a blind date. Neither were comfortable at all. Dropped off drinks, both were polite, dropped off food, asked how everything was, the guy rolled his eyes and said, well, the food is great, I just wish she would talk more. Girl's face went tomato red and I dropped off the check shortly after. Poor girl. To preface, I work in a restaurant where we make our own ketchup and some people just don't like it. Fine, whatever, if you're nice I'll bring you the secret Heinz ketchup as long as you don't tell anyone. Anyway, a woman is seated at my table looking super excited and tells me she's on a blind date. She orders a glass of wine and waits anxiously, how cute, right? So this dude shows up on his phone, ignores my hostess, and eventually finds this beautiful woman waiting for him. He continued to talk on his phone for like 15 minutes, and when he finally hung up I went to the table. He tried to order for her, which obviously embarrassed her, and for himself ordered a well-done steak and fries. When I brought it to him he asked for A1 and real ketchup. When I informed him we had neither, he grunted and said he had ketchup packets in his truck. As soon as he walked out the door she asked for her half of the check and her food to go. I helped her leave out the side door before he could even come back. It was awkward serving him after that. He used 7 ketchup packets. I had a teenage couple come unaccompanied by a parent. In college, I invited a really shy girl from my accounting class to dinner and a movie. She showed up with her parents. It was awkward. They didn't want to go to the theater after dinner, instead they insisted I go to their house in a neighboring town. We watched LOTR in the living room with her dad staring at us intensely. We never really talked much after that. A friend later told me it was the first date she'd ever had. Sometimes I wish I'd been better at handling the awkwardness of that night, but I wasn't. My first day at my first job as a server at a sushi restaurant, 17 at the time with minimal people skills lol. I had just checked in an older woman possibly in her early 60s/late 50s with a young man who couldn't have been older than 25. Midway through their meal I went to check up on them asking, "Are you taking mom out today?" They both turned with straight faces and the young man answered, "She's my girlfriend." I whispered an apology and just peeled myself away. Probably the one where the guy's choice of footwear was such a turn-off that the woman didn't even sit down with him. She left before he even saw that she came in. I was a hostess at the time, so I had to go awkwardly explain to the gentleman that his date arrived and left. When he asked if she gave a reason, I had to tell him that she didn't like his shoes. His choice of footwear. Those strange running shoes that look like feet. The ones where each individual toe goes into a separate spot like toe socks. Luckily they were black and grey and not any sort of crazy colors. He wore them with a nice grey suit. It was really bad looking. Man was devastated. Note, this was almost 7 years ago. Long before they were popular. I waited tables during college. The most awkward date I saw unfold at that time was a lady in her mid-30s who got stood up. Like an hour in, she was still waiting and drinking her third glass of wine. It was really sad to see her come to the realization that her date stood her up. But by that time, she had 3 glasses of wine in her and she ordered food, and just talked with random wait staff from time to time, and I'm fairly certain ended up convincing one of the waiter who was getting off his shift to go home with her. There is really no excuse for this kind of behavior. I have been on online dates where the person extensively misrepresented what they looked like, and I still spent the next hour talking, drinking with them, and just never agreed to meet up again. 1 hour is not a lot of your life, and it's very easy to not make someone feel like shit just because you're not interested. Especially if you're a dude, the girl is not gonna come hunt you down, and it's very easy to be friendly while giving clear signals that you aren't further interested. And when we did, I was a little drunk, and I'd had a good time, and I would have told you this was a mistake, but I went home with her and, well, let's just say she went to bed at 5 a.m. when I left. And thus began our relationship, a friendship where we also slept together, which relatively quickly blossomed into love. And, yeah, she's still obese. And I'm generally not attracted to obese women. But, damn, am I ever attracted to her, if anything even more now, despite having 2 kids. Can you imagine if I'd just said, "You're heavier than I expected, I'm leaving"? I'd have missed out on the love of my life. Using my burner account for this story, because I would never, ever tell her this, but I met my wife this way. She's beautiful, I mean, really stately and lovely, and her eyes just twinkle in this really lovely way. But few extra pounds my ass, she's obese. And, when I saw that on our first date I thought, shit, I was really enjoying texting with this girl, but she's completely not my type. But you know what? I sat down and talked to her, and tried to show her a good time, because I'm not an asshole. And damn was it fun. She was hilarious and there was this instant connection. It seemed like every new subject we talked about led to 5 more. A few hours later I walked her home and, you know, I was a little drunk, and I'd had a good time, and I would have told you this was a mistake, but I kissed her. Then we made plans to grab dinner a week or so later. Okay, walking to work at 5 p.m. The only people in the bar were a couple on a date. A fellow bartender walks out of the restroom shaking his head in disbelief and shock. He immediately starts pointing to the guy and told me what happened. I walk into the men's restroom, and before my precious eyes lays a Havana omelette, feces on the floor and shit smeared all over the restroom wall like a fucking mosaic. I'm so livid and dry heaving at this point that a waitress asked if she could say something to the gentleman. I said sure, and she walked up to the table and asked the guy if he shit himself and if he needs a doctor. The woman on the date then turns around to look at the waitress in complete confusion and asked what the waitress said. The waitress then replied, he knows what I'm talking about, he shit all over the men's. The woman on the date shoved her plate and drink into the guy's lap and said, really, Vince? Again? He ran out so fast before we could make him clean it. Not a server, but my so and I went to a hibachi restaurant and witnessed the most cringeworthy moment. We sit down at our table and are joined by another couple. We say hello and casually chit-chat with the strangers. Just before the chef begins to cook, the woman hands her boyfriend a small gift bag. The guy opens the bag and finds a card with an ultrasound pic inside. The man is visibly upset and embarrassed, telling her that she knows he doesn't want any kids. A hushed argument ensues and the woman disappears into the bathroom. He then tells us that he doesn't even like this woman and really doesn't want a kid with her. We finished our meals in awkward silence and often wonder what happened to those people. I was not a server at the time, but my boyfriend and I went out to dinner one night and sitting directly in front of us was a middle-aged man wearing basketball shorts, a t-shirt and flip-flops with socks. He had ordered himself a large appetizer and was drinking a beer. 5 minutes later, this younger, attractive, very nicely dressed woman came in and sat with him. You could tell by the look on her face that this was a first date and not what she expected. By this time, he had already ate most of the appetizer and was very loudly talking about how tiny her body was and how he's a big man that likes to be in charge. We felt terrible for this girl. She was very mousy and seemed too sweet to say anything. He kept trying to get her to take shots with him, and then was commenting about her having to crash at his place. It was time to leave, so we made the bartender aware that the girl looked to be uncomfortable. Wasn't serving at this time, but oversaw this waiting for takeout at a sushi place. Around 3-ish, a guy comes in and explains to the staff that he was coming in later that night with a date, and that he wants them to come out with a roll and say, hi so-and-so, nice to see you again, this is on the house. The waitress gave him the most blank look, so he explained the whole thing again, emphasizing how he would actually pay for the roll now. I should have gone back later to see how that played out. A pair in their mid-20s on what appeared to be a first date where the girl was clearly way out of the guy's league and he was apparently completely broke. I mean, like trying to make it work on literal pocket change broke. Every time she tried to order something he was like, no. Do you guys have anything cheaper? At one point he had a pile of change on the table and they were counting it out together, lol. They ended up getting water and an order of French fries that they shared. She looked horrified, but to her credit she stuck it out for the duration. Felt bad for the guy, but at the same time I just have no idea what he was thinking. And no, for the record, it was not Dave Chappelle. This guy waited for his fiancée to show up only to get on his knees and propose pretty much the moment she sat down. I immediately knew from the look on her face that things were going to go downhill real quick. I was working at Olive Garden at the time, so they ordered some pasta. Everyone could hear them arguing, but mostly you could hear the woman repeatedly say, "You know how I fucking feel about him." The fight continued until I heard a loud "oh." She threw an entire plate of pasta at his face. She stormed outside, he followed, and eventually the cops came and arrested the woman. I assume she was arrested for aggravated assault or something. Edit, she went outside first. Edit 2, highest voted comment, haha, woo. Had a table, girl showed up first and then the man. She was super quiet and so was he, until like 30 minutes in he's screaming at her and she goes to the bathroom. My table next to them were shocked and he said, "What the hell are you looking at? You think I'm gonna beat her? I'm not gonna fucking beat her." After they said nothing to him at all. They obviously broke up during the meal and I told 2 off-duty bouncers what was happening. The girls at the table next to them didn't say anything until the breakup couple left, and they found the girl leaving the bathroom and said they'd walk her home, not to worry about the tab, etc. So she leaves with them and the guy says nothing about the event. Nothing. Asks for their check, leaves me almost 100%. Leaves. Then the girls next to them speak up about it to me, and they're young college girls, so I had to explain to them if they ever see this going on or it's happening to them to let their server know or another server discreetly, and we'll make sure they get a ride/walk home. They were totally shocked restaurant staff would do that for them. I hope they told their friends they could use that, too. I am a friend of a server who told me that the worst date she witnessed was one night with a 50-year-old man and an early 20s woman. All of the booths were filled, so they were seated at a table for 2. But the woman sat in the guy's lap the whole time. In his lap? WTF. So their plates were pushed side by side awkwardly and half of the table was not used. And to top it all off, they dined and dashed. Cheap horny weirdos. Not a server, but I was at an outdoor restaurant/bar and it must have been their first date or something, but a couple was sitting across from each other and the girl was endlessly texting while the guy was talking to her. He just kept talking, laughing, and she kept saying, "Yeah. Cool. Nice." She wouldn't even look up from her phone for a straight 30 minutes. I would have gone to the bathroom and never come back if I were him. Wasn't so much date, despite her trying pretty hard. I was eating at a pub with my parents Christmas Eve near my work when we see a work function nearby getting really rowdy. There's this woman, probably mid-40s, trying very hard to look mid-20s, and aging herself even more, hitting on her coworker pretty heavily. He seems really uncomfortable about the whole thing and frequently tried to get her out of his hair by moving seats around the table to talk to other coworkers. She keeps following. We're finishing up our food when he gets up to leave, saying bye to everyone and that his ride is there. We watch her follow him out where he's meeting up with this handsome guy, whom he kisses and turns to introduce her to his husband, which we gathered by him pointing to the rings on their fingers. Looked hella awkward for her. I once had a couple on a date who were regulars. They shared a bottle of wine and were having a great time. About 45 minutes into their meal, the table across from them was seated with a large party. On my way to check on the couple, one of the people in the large party pulls me aside and asks me what their co-worker Paul is doing with that young lady. I told them that he was on a date and that they've been there a few times together. The gentleman looks at me in disbelief and says, "I just had lunch with him and his wife, Carol, earlier this week." And proceeds to point Paul out to the rest of the group who were all familiar with Paul and Carol. Paul was not with Carol that night. Edit, wording. Fries, I can see why she's mad at him for this. He ignored her for a majority of the date, he didn't compliment her outfit or makeup, he used his vape in the restaurant. These were the main points of her argument. There was a lot more to the list, but it was hard to understand what the girl was saying towards the end because she's starting crying. I'm not a server, but I used to work as a bakery clerk. The bakery was attached to a restaurant. I had to go inside the restaurant and pass out samples, and I witnessed a table where the guy was on his phone the entire time. It didn't seem too bad until they came to the bakery afterwards and ordered cake slices. I asked them if they wanted their cake slices in the same box or separate, and the woman said same box, and her boyfriend interrupted saying no. Separate boxes. It didn't seem like a big deal, but this woman fucking lost it. She started listing off everything he did wrong and how he's probably cheating on her with his ex. It was absolutely glorious, and I got to stand there for 10 minutes and watch it happen. Edit, for those of you asking for the list of things this guy did wrong according to the girl, this is how I remember it as. He didn't pay for her meal. He didn't share his. Weirdly enough, I worked at a nice Italian restaurant in university, and one day a nice man came in to make a reservation and explained he was going to propose, so he wanted a certain table and wanted to mirror other things that had happened from their first date. It was really sweet, he seemed so in love and nice, and we were all quite excited for him. When they came in, she was appropriately excited and impressed with the table and remembered their date, and things were going well from a distance. We finally get to the big moment, the ring was in her champagne, and they just go hushed tones and quiet. It was a slow night, we were all watching. The hostess had been asked to take pictures to send to him. Next the guy gets up, won't even look at her and leaves, and she just puts her head down and cries. She said no. She didn't tell us why, but she seemed quite distraught. We all ended up consoling her. There's no way this was the first time she behaved this way. I don't want to belittle abuse, but Jesus, why propose? It's part of the abuse, generally. She probably broke him to such a massive degree that, even though he was aware of how horribly he was being treated and how miserable it made him, he still wanted to be in the relationship, because either one, he thought that was how relationships worked and that she genuinely loved him underneath all of the abuse, or two, figured that proposing to her would magically make her a better person and treat him better. Abusive relationships often turn into Stockholm Syndrome cases. I spent 6 months of my life attempting to salvage a toxic, borderline abusive relationship, and my exact mindset: if I do tons of incredibly kind, extravagant, expensive stuff for her, maybe I'll be treated better. Long periods of abuse can seriously fuck up a person's view of the world and perception of reality. Not a server, but used to be a DJ, on a dinner harbor cruise. So this 40s-ish old Asian dude has some decent cash, and while not getting one of the private boats, is upgraded his regular dinner date to include a special table and event coordinator, dinner for one of his buddies to be a videographer, and get his own special dance with his girlfriend P to start off what should be dance time for all the guests. He's also arranged to have 24 roses waiting on the table when they arrive, plus a treasure chest filled with 75 more, for a total of 99, that will be brought out by the coordinator and another member of the serving staff at the end of the aforementioned dance. At this point he will propose. I am informed of this all ahead of time because as the DJ I need to welcome them out to the dance floor for their special dance after dinner and make sure the rest of the guests and do a server afterwards, and they told me that they had a guy at one of their tables tell them at the beginning of the night that he was gonna propose and ordered the celebration dessert. Well, dessert time rolls around a while after the above incident, and the waiter brings out the dessert and says congratulations as she sets it on the table. The woman at the table looks confused and the man gives the quickest of head shakes. The waitress acts as if she's confused tables and just sets the dessert down and walks away. The first guy's proposal went to bad, it scared the second guy off. He managed to blow 2 proposals in one night. Not interrupt? Couple shows up and the girl looks like she's probably 15 if not 20 years younger than the guy, but the evening goes as planned, right up to the part where the song ends and he gets down on one knee, takes her hand, holds the ring at the tip of her finger and asked her to marry him. She just stands there. The music has stopped. The event coordinator and server A are holding the roses. The friend is filming. She just stands there giving no response. Now there's a good 60 to 80 other people in this level of the boat sitting in uncomfortable silence watching this unfold. I can't say for sure how long it went on. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Every so often he would whisper to her, and eventually she let him slide the ring onto her finger, and they slunk away back to their table. Now, here's the icing on this tragic cake of awkwardness. I was talking to. I work at an ice cream parlor. A couple years ago I had a couple come in, it seemed like their first or at least one of their first dates. Kind of nervous around each other, but they seemed to go together well. They're looking over the menu and they finally decide or whatever. They're standing at the register, and the girl takes out her wallet to get ready to order hers. He insists he'll pay and they spend a minute or two going back and forth over this while I wait for them to order. They come to an agreement that he will pay. Thank goodness. It's always awkward standing there while people argue over this and both shove their credit cards at you and expect you to choose who is responsible for the bill. They order, I go get their sundaes, ring them up, and once this guy sees the total, which was probably like $10 or less, he awkwardly stands there for a minute and says to me, "Can we do them separate?" Then turns to the girl and says, "You still wanted to pay for your own, right?" She looks kind of like TF. And slowly gets her wallet back out of her bag that she'd put away when he decided he would pay and was like, "Yeah, sure, that's fine." They sat inside in mostly silence for like 15 minutes and she clearly was no longer interested. LMFAO. I didn't know who to feel bad for. I'm all for splitting the bill. I would never expect a dude to pay for me just because I'm a woman, but after the few minutes they spent debating and he insisted, and then instantly changed his mind because his date was not worth $5, that was an awkward one, especially because that couple and me were the only people in the shop the whole time. Just happened about an hour ago. Pre-prom dinner or something. Guess they had taken pictures today so not to have to do it tomorrow. Guys and girls all done up, suits, sparkly dresses. One girl got up to use the bathroom, guess she didn't know it was that time of month, her dress had a huge spot on the back, she had absolutely no clue. Female server runs in after her to tell her, they explain this to her date. He says, "Guess there goes my night and weekend," and just noped the fuck out the restaurant. Left her here and with the bill. Ungrateful, and you should be ashamed. Now mind you, This couple had only had 2 drinks at this point and seemed completely sober when they walked in, so alcohol didn't play a part. I felt so sorry for their daughter. She looked mortified sitting in between them and just kept sipping her drink while occasionally begging for them to stop fighting. The couple ended up leaving, separately, and their daughter stayed behind and looked so broken. I felt terrible for her as I come from a broken home, so I went over and introduced myself and said how I recognized her from my brother's friend group and bought her a drink. Super nice girl. It's a shame she had to endure that mess in public. This wasn't exactly a date, but one of the most awkward situations I've seen. I used to bartend and run cold side at a pretty fancy Cajun place in my hometown. One night I was fixing some salads while my coworker was bartending. An older couple sits down at the bar and places their drink and appetizer order, nothing out of the ordinary. 10 or 15 minutes pass and in walks one of my brother's friends that I recognize, and she sits down in between the couple who were her parents. Anyway, they continue to act completely normal, and we're actually quite a joy to have sitting at the bar. But something happened when I left to grab their appetizer from the kitchen. When I come back, the gentleman is laying into his wife about this, that and the other. I try really hard to tune out other people's conversations while bartending. It's none of my business. The only words I really caught were, I worked at a semi-casual restaurant, and we would have a decent amount of blind dates. So I have a gentleman arrive for his reservation. So I seat him at table 8. Then I have a lady show up, looking for her friend. I ask her if it's the gentleman at table 8. She thanks me and sits down with him. Well, they start hitting it off great. Order drinks, apps, the whole thing. Then, another guy comes in, says he's waiting for his friend and stands in the lobby texting on his phone. Eventually we catch on that he was also on a blind date, and was supposed to be with the girl at table 8. The girl eventually comes up after getting a text from him, apologized, then sat down with both guys to enjoy the apps. Well, eventually she suggests that her date was with the second guy, and that the first guy should head out. But it turns out the first guy was stood up on his blind date. Lol, it was such a mess, and the first guy was royally pissed that he was being kicked away. Hope that made sense. When I worked at a drive-through coffee shop, my team and I saw this super awkward teenage couple on their first date. We were right by a high school and movie theater, so it wasn't anything unusual. However, as he got ready to back Mom's minivan out of a parking spot, the poor kid hit the gas pedal by mistake. Car goes straight into the marsh behind our parking lot. Police, fire department, and Mom show up a bit later to pick up the kid. Everyone was fine, just one case of severely wounded pride. Another one that started out awful but ended wonderful. 2 teenage to early 20s girls came in for a date. I don't know how this happened, but one poor girl was a little too excited to use the revolving door, moves faster than the door can turn, and smacks her head on the glass. Looked like it hurt. She immediately starts bawling, so I rush over with a rag filled with ice. She's got a bump on her forehead and a small cut, but was okay. At one point she looked up to the ceiling and cried, "This is so embarrassing." My co-workers and I gave them free coffee and all the pastries they wanted to eat. Both girls ended up staying until close, talking and left holding hands. I hope they are still happy. This guy has been coming in regularly for first dates. He's in again. Customers order at the bar, so he comes up and asks for 2 spaghettis. Fair enough. I bring 'em over and put them down. The girl says, "Oh, I wanted the vegetarian spaghetti." After an awkward interaction, she proceeded to eat it anyway. At the end comes the bill. I ask, together. He says, no, split. I'll never forget the look on her face. Not a server, but I was in hearing range of this one. I was in a staff cafeteria while working for Disney. This young woman had clearly been trying to set these two young gay men up for a while. Finally their lunches collided so she could introduce them to each other and let them get to know each other over lunch. She got them set up, told them what they had in common, and left. The disaster started from there. One of them kept talking about his ex-boyfriend while the other guy became increasingly more frustrated. I can't decide if I feel worse for the guy who had to bear about someone's ex-boyfriend for half an hour or for the poor girl, who worked so hard to try to set them up. Not a server, but I heard this one once. Me and my family got seated and behind us was this couple on a date. The guy gets up to use the bathroom and comes back and compared his pee to that of Niagara Falls. The woman he was with was Korean, and when she told him that, he talked about how his buddy had a farm that employed 50 of your people to her. Edit, sorry I wrote this in a hurry. In and get us a room. My date by this point is dumbfounded, giving me a "are seriously going to do this" look. Boy, we did. Afterward, we were resting for a bit when there was a knock on the door. His parents were there to collect what is theirs. I never saw him again. Not in school, not accidentally on the street, anywhere. His Facebook disappeared too. Super fancy, button-up clothes? Like the type of stuff you see at a wedding, funeral, or some really crazy event. The cogs in my brain are tinkering by this point. If they followed us for the last hour, I want to mess with them as much as possible. After we finished our meal with his family just sitting behind him, sometimes talking and smiling at us, I say, well, let's go. My date is completely confused as I practically drag him out of the diner. The first place we stop is a drugstore. I buy things like candy, soda, condoms. As we exit, I see two SUVs with what I assume is his father sitting on the driver's seat of one and his mother sitting in the driver's seat of another. Next place we go to is a motel nearby. As we park, I notice the two SUVs slow down in front of it and slowly creeps away. I walk out grabbing his hand with our goods and I fucking make sure they see us. I walk. I didn't just see this date. I was a part of it, but I didn't let it end that way. Went to meet a guy. I was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. It was going to be casual, nothing unusual. When he arrived, he was wearing a button-up shirt, a tie, and dress pants with fancy shoes. He kept acting suspicious the entire time. Looking over his shoulder. We'd go into a restaurant or diner and he'd say, "Not here." And we'd walk to another. Finally, when we settle for a place, I see him looking around nervously. He just spills it all. My entire family has been following us for the last hour. That was when see a group of 12 enter the diner and he just says, "Fuck. They are here." They sit behind him and keep staring at him, smiling. We are just eating our appetizers and stuff, but it's super creepy. He keeps apologizing and saying he'll make it up to me. That is when I realize they are all wearing. I'll tell you one that's first-hand. Back in my youth, I had a guy show up with a friend that I didn't know would be joining us on our date. Then when we get to the movie theater, neither of them had brought their wallets. The guy in the ticket booth was slack-jawed and so embarrassed for me. At the end of the night, the friend actually started to dictate to him what he should do. "Okay, so now you walk her to her door and give her a kiss goodnight. Go for the lips." "Oh no, I'm good thanks." He kisses me on the cheek anyway and runs off into the night screaming and giggling. A couple of days later I have people coming up to me asking when I became his girlfriend. When I stated we only went on a single and quite bad date, he got wind of it. He and the same friend rushed me in the hallway and he was holding back tears. "You're telling people you aren't my girlfriend?" It was. One date, and it didn't go well, man. Not the answer he was looking for. She hands me $40 and wants me to buy them around. WTH. $22 tip for me, so okay, I send the drinks to the table with my compliments, they wave thanks. Later on she does it again, asks me to send a round. I did it, knowing the couple would be drunk at this point. The couple finishes up and leaves. They even stop by the bar on the way out and he shakes my hand, says thank you. Right next to his wife sitting there. They leave. Then I see the wife's plan unfold. It was epic. She pulls out her phone, calls 911 and reports a drunk driver. She gives his car description and license plate number and says he is on the road she knew he would take home. Brutal, but deserved. It would be his 4th DUI, so, prison time? TL, Dr. Wife in disguise busts cheating husband and sets him up for prison. Former bartender. A couple is having a flirty date at a table close to my bar. 2 drink rounds in, him mojitos, her mango cosmos, and they are having a great time. Laughs, kisses, crazy flirting. Lady comes in and sits at the bar, she seems off. She stares at the bar menu for a good 5 to 10. The menu is upside down. I figure out she is watching the couple behind her through the bar mirror. So I go over to greet her. As soon as I get close, I see she is wearing a wig. A bad one. She takes her sunglasses down and I see she has been crying. Now I'm intrigued. She's not getting a drink until I get her story. Turns out the couple behind her is her husband and his mistress. For the next hour I have to give her a play-by-play of her husband's date, so awkward. She is devastated but keeps wanting details. Then I was a bartender at a burger joint. A creepy TV-wearing older gentleman, who was a regular, brought in what appeared to be a younger escort. For our operating procedures, I asked her what temperature she wanted her burger cooked. The regular then interjected and said medium rare while staring into her eyes and licking his lips. I will never forget. Not sure if this counts. It was kind of a series of dates. Disclaimer, I obviously don't know if any of this is super accurate because it's not like we asked. Where I worked years ago, we had one guy who would come in with 2 different women separately. They were both around the same age. Maybe one was a sister, who knows. But he was a regular and was always with one of them. We were a nicer restaurant, so we mostly had couples dining, including these 2 gross older men who would bring their super young dates and ask for the most private table every time. The rumor among the servers was that he was dating both. Then one time, only once that I know of, he came in with both of them. We were all shocked. Maybe it wasn't awkward for him, but it was for us because of our own rumors. The ladies sat next to each other on one side of the booth. Dude was pretty nice though. My parents ended up going there for an anniversary and sat in the booth next to them. He overheard it was their anniversary and paid the bill. Not a server, but my first job was at a Hardee's. This massively overweight woman comes in carrying a walnut bag. Then a guy They're both well into their 40s. I'm cleaning the tables and happen to overhear them. The guy asks if she brought the stuff. She said that she did. They then begin to talk about, in full detail, about the anal sex they were about to have. The guy said something along the lines about how she was not going to be able to shit right for a week. By this point, they're both sweating profusely. They both get up and go to leave. The woman left the bag sitting on the floor. I have a rag in my hand, so I pick up the bag with the rag, and say, "Mom, you forgot this." I couldn't even look her in the eye. She takes it from my hand and said, "Thanks. I'm gonna need this later." My sad little manager brought his date to the restaurant he managed. He made us change the music and he over-ordered just to try the dishes he loves to ensure quality. She looked like she wanted to jump out a window. Next day he asked me, "What did you think?" Totally referring to her looks. I hadn't thought about that in years. Wasn't like the boy's mom was abandoning a child, but they couldn't wait 10 minutes until the girl's mom showed up, just to make sure she had a ride. 35 years ago, it was obviously a date neither one of them wanted to be on. I don't remember the whole story, but I think this was a month or so before prom and their mothers were trying to set them up to be prom dates. They ordered, talked for a while, but by the time I cleared their salad plates and brought their entrees, they had both pulled out books and spent the rest of the time reading. Until the boy's mom showed up and threw a little fit that they hadn't fallen in love and were already engaged, a slight exaggeration. I do remember the mom saying, "We went to a lot of trouble to set this up." And the huge eye roll from both the boy and girl, because a dinner at Denny's could not be a huge task. Then it got really awkward when the mom took the check and snapped her fingers at the boy and told him to get moving, leaving the girl to wait for her mom. The girl was 16 to 17, and it make him pay for hers, gave her her part of the check. She tried to tell me the other guy was paying for it, and I told her no, absolutely not. After some fuss from her, the bouncers came over and told her if she didn't pay her check and leave, we'd have to call the police and send her to detox, so she paid for her tab and found some other man to take her home. I ended up buying that guy most of his drinks for the night because I felt bad for him. He seemed really excited about the date. Definitely one of the more awkward dates I've seen, as he just sat quietly and politely at the bar while she grinded on other men. This is going to get buried because the questions is already 9 hours old, but I got to witness a Tinder date. It was their first meet and I felt so bad for the guy. The guy showed up first and explained to me what was going on. He ordered his beer and sat and patiently waited for her. She showed up 40 minutes late to their date. She was already hammered and a hot sloppy mess. Very soon into their date she lost interest and was going around and hitting on other guys at the bar, sitting on their laps, and paying no attention to her date. But the last straw was when she lost one of her shoes, was walking around without it and yelling through the bar for someone to buy her a shot. I promptly cut her off. I had only given her a single beer by this point before I realized how drunk she was, but I'm sure other people had already been buying her shots. I split their bill. I wasn't gonna. There was a family that came in together. All of a sudden the dad would come in with the daughter and his mom. Didn't think much of it. Until the mom came in one day with some other dude. It's weird when you see strangers' lives unfold from such an outside perspective. Well, one day the inevitable happened. The dad with his daughter and his mom came in, then the ex with her boyfriend came in. All the servers knew it was awkward but were trying to keep it cool. They ended up handling it well. Mom and BF were discussing it, trying to figure out the appropriate thing to do. They finished their meals, then went over to the dad's table and said hello to the little girl, and the dad then left. It was nice to see such an awkward situation be handled so quietly and without conflict. Not a server, but I was at a restaurant and I saw a couple from the boomer generation sit down to have a meal together. The server, who was just some regular chick in her late teens to early 20s, asked them what kind of salad they wanted with their meal, and the man immediately yells blue cheese at her. The poor girl was taken aback and repeated the question, and again the man yelled blue cheese. Something with blue cheese at her, like she was an idiot. I felt bad for both the guy's date and the server. Only freaks like anime. She loves anime. According to him it's okay because he means Americans, not Japanese people. She flatly points out in her very American accent that she's American. He stammers, then goes off about weebos for a while. When we left he was grilling her about everything and anything concerning the manufacturing of sushi. She doesn't know any of these answers, aside from telling he can't just buy a fish from Walmart and eat it raw. He insists that she must know. Saw the worst date at a sushi place the other day. White guy comes in with his date, a Japanese American woman. I'm ignoring him for a while until some comment about Chinese people catches my ear. My date and I spend the next 30 minutes listen to this guy continue to dig himself a deeper hole. Some highlights. Dude goes on for several minutes about how real wasabi is so much better, don't you agree? She doesn't agree. But it's more expensive and rare, so it's better. She thinks that's a mark against it actually. He then asks her if he gave her wasabi root if she'd just make some for him. She changes the subject. Later he comments that he hates the decor, a lot of anime/manga posters and stuff mixed, some really cool vintage posters/advertisements, because all anime is for children. She explains that it most defiantly is not. He counters anything for adults is porn, and anyways. Not a server, but I once witnessed a couple, who were already seated when I arrived, sit at a table for 45 minutes and not say a single word to each other. The weirder thing, given it's 2018, is that they weren't even looking at their phones, they were just sipping drinks and awkwardly looking everywhere except at each other. I thought maybe they were a couple in a fight who just wanted to eat the food they paid for, but they lingered after finishing their food. He'd already paid while she was in the restroom, didn't really believe her, but it didn't matter much. She called for a cab after that. The guy was still trying to start his car at 11 p.m. when I left. I was a server at a place that had a special for all-you-can-eat riblets. This was in sometime in 2000. Man and woman come in, get seated in my section. Dude was a little dingy, looked to be in his early 30s, she was much better put together, I guessed late 20s. Got orders, drinks, they both did the riblet thing, they spent about 3 hours there. During that time the guy also asked me about how I liked working there and if we were hiring for kitchen help. I got him an application and he filled it out. While I was giving it over to the manager they tried to leave. They managed to get to their car, they even would have managed to get away if the battery wasn't dead. My manager and I went out to give him his bill, he explained he didn't have any money, so my manager started to call the police. His date stepped up and paid for the bill and gave me a hefty tip. She said he had told her. I'm working in a diner and I take an order for a couple getting lunch together. The man is absolutely filthy, and smells like putrid cheese, and the woman looks like she has an eating disorder. When I ask the man for his order, he yells beak at the top of his lungs, before his date convinces him to order a chicken sandwich. Then the woman, who I've heard speaking completely normally, starts ordering in a terrible German accent. Thankfully, she understands how she sounds and orders normally. To top it all off, when I walked past them, I heard them talking to each other about how they planned to run away, and leave the other with the bill.